Come for the bread, stay for the politics. I'm Ben Walsh, and this is Let Them Eat Bread. Today on Let Them Eat Bread, we have an incredibly special episode, not only because we are not making bread this week, but because we have our first ever guest, my friend and yours, Adam Schlesinger.
Hi.
Hey, Adam, how you doing?
I'm doing good.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
All right, so what are we making today?
All right, so today we're making fresh egg pasta, kind of a parpadelle, because that's kind of the cutter that we have. And then we're also going to make kind of quick tomato sauce to go with it. So, not bread, but like
it's a staple. It's a basic.
It's a basic.
If you can make bread, you can make pasta.
Really, yeah. If you can make bread, you can make pasta. It actually was what kept me from getting into bread making for a while, because I was like, I already know how to make one carb.
Yeah, right. Let's not ruin it with a second carb.
Right, but then pandemic kind of like got me into sourdough. So
yeah.
So now I'm kind of back on my pasta BS, but yeah.
Hey, it happens. All right. So how are we getting started? What are we gonna do first?
So I think first we should make the pasta dough, roll it out, and then we can start the sauce, let it simmer as kind of the pasta dries, cut the pasta, and then kind of cook everything together. Pasta and sauce. So.
All right. Well, you heard the man. Let's get started. So.
All right. So the pasta recipe is 3 types of flour.
All right. So what are our 3 types of flour?
So the first type of flour is regular all-purpose flour.
All right. We got about 170 grams of that.
Yeah. So it's 350 grams of dry, and so it's kind of half all-purpose flour.
Okay. I'll take that.
And then half 00 or doppio zero flour, which is kind of fine milled. I think it's kind of low protein. It's kind of what they use in pizza.
And it's especially good for not developing a ton of gluten.
Yeah.
Which is great. I'll take that.
And then the last is kind of semolina, which is durum wheat, and it gives pasta kind of its like distinctive yellow color.
And you'll know semolina flour if you've ever ordered a pizza at an Italian pizzeria, because what they'll do is they'll put it on the bottom of the pizza to make sure it doesn't stick to the oven.
Yeah. So you make some dry goods, and the traditional Italian way of doing this is to kind of mix it all together and then make a little nest and then kind of put a fork together. But I'm not Italian and I'm lazy. So I just kind of do it all in the stand mixer, and it comes out pretty good.
So just in case you don't have a stand mixer, what Adam's talking about is you're going to take your flours, you're going to put them on a board like we have here, and just create a little mountain of them. Once you do that, you're going to take your fingers, preferably 2 of them, and just go in from the top and create a little hole. We will put our wet ingredients into there in order to make sure that everything has a lot of ways to mix before we actually do the mixing. This is similar to when on the show we make our wells for our bread dough, when we put our liquid ingredients in, so that there is maximal amount of contact between the wet ingredients and the dry ingredients. Remember my instructions for doing it in the stand mixer. This is going to be very similar.
Sure. So we mixed up the 3 flours, and then we're going to add our eggs. So here we have 3 eggs and 1 yolk. The reason we don't add the last yolk is because we want the dough to kind of come together as dry as possible. It'll seem really crumbly for a while, but eventually kind of start to cohere. Sometimes you can add a little water if it's really not coming together. But you want the dough to really be as dry as possible, because then when you roll it out and cut it, it doesn't stick to itself. So pouring in the egg here.
Right.
Just letting it come together.
Get the last little bits of that out there. We pay too much for eggs in this country to let them go to waste. All right.
So right now the dough, stop it. So right now you can kind of see the dough is really kind of is like really crumbly, which is good because you don't want it to be too wet, so that it comes together into kind of a dry ball. And you just kind of let it.
Now, if we're doing this by hand with a fork,
yeah.
At what point do you start to kind of clump it together? What's the steps?
So the idea behind the idea behind doing it with the fork is you can kind of start to bring all of the flour into the dough ball. So you kind of start in the middle, you crack the eggs into the well that you've created, and then you start whipping it with a fork to start incorporating the flour evenly into the dough, and that way, again, you can use less liquid ingredients and more dry ingredients, so that the whole thing doesn't get wet.
Right.
So.
And so when we're in that, when it's just starting to come together, we would form it into our dough ball if you're doing it on a thing here, and then we'd start to knead it.
Exactly.
Okay. Great.
So yeah, so this is not coming together, which is good. It means we haven't overwet it. But that means we might need to start adding like very little bits of water at a time. So
Well, let's get some.
yeah. So let's just feel what we got here. Actually, we can dump this out because it is kind of coming together. So I'm actually gonna transfer this to the pan.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, absolutely. Feel free. And I have some ice cold water here if you need it.
Temperature doesn't matter as much because
We're not making pie.
yeah, exactly.
There we go. Perfect.
And it's pretty. So here you can see it's dry and it's crumbly, but it's
Just like graham crackers a little bit.
yeah, it's definitely got like a crushed graham cracker. And actually, we might not need any water.
All right.
As we kind of pull it together. This is nice and dry. So just as long as we can kind of get everything into a single dough ball, it's very tempting to like add more water so that it comes together.
Yeah.
But like
But you really need it to be dry, right? You were saying.
Yeah, you really need it to be dry because the main pitfall to kind of making fresh pasta is if the dough starts to stick to itself, and that makes cutting it a lot harder. That makes kind of like when you cut it and then let it dry, you don't want it to stick together when it goes into the pot.
Right.
So like as dry as possible. So.
And it looks like most of it is coming together here.
Yeah, the eggs provide enough moisture, which is actually why you don't put in the last egg white. It's really supposed to just kind of.
Oh, so it's not just for color.
Well, I'm saying the last yolk. You put in the last yolk because that's just enough. That's just enough egg to kind of put it in to get it together. But that last white would be more kind of liquid than you need. Whites are mostly water. So.
Right.
And these are 4 or 3 large eggs and 1 large egg yolk. So if you have the extra large yolks in the grocery store, you might want to add a little bit more flour.
Keeping in mind that 1 extra large egg is approximately 1.5 large eggs. So something to keep in mind if you're ever doing conversions.
Okay, I did not know that.
There you go. Learn something new every day. I'm learning from you. You're learning from me. It's great.
Exactly. It's exchange of knowledge. Okay. So this all came together in kind of this shaggy, very kind of tough ball. And now the thing that you can do traditionally is you start to knead it. And it's not a very fun dough to knead because it is very dry. So let the stand mixer do the work. Again, this is the sound of 1,000 Italian nanas crying out.
Yeah, well, that's okay. That's all right.
But
so if you were going to do this, so while you get that started, if you were going to do this by hand, we're going to use our same traditional kneading techniques. We're going to put our hands like this, where your fingers bend in. You're going to push and pull to the extent you can. Now, because this is very dry, you're going to spend a lot of time kind of recouping the dough together and making sure it is done in the way that will allow you to develop some gluten. We're not trying to develop a ton of gluten here, but we do want to develop just a little bit to get that nice little elasticity that you get in your traditional pasta.
just use just a little bit of water.
There you go.
Just like a tiny bit, because it's not even needed. Yeah, that's all I need.
So about how much water do you think you get? Like a quarter of a teaspoon, something like
Well, it's really by feel.
Okay.
like I said, you really don't want to add too much because you want the dough to be as dry as possible. The recipe that I use calls for like a tablespoon or two, and that might be necessary given the level of dryness here. And
Oh, so we can always add a little more.
yeah, you can always add a little bit more, but you can't take any out. And
Right.
trying to integrate more flour into an already made dough, like it's not the best. Like you don't want to like, oh, this is too wet, I'm gonna add more flour. That balancing act becomes really difficult.
And it's the opposite of bread, where you actually want a wetter dough to start and add flour to it.
Yeah.
This one, we want a floury dough, we don't want to add water to it.
Exactly. You like, yeah, because even when you're rolling it out, if you're like, oh, this feels a little wet, I'm gonna add a little bit more flour. Just like it doesn't incorporate.
It just sits on the surface.
It kind of sits on the surface. It doesn't work. It doesn't work the same way. So, yeah, this is. I'm gonna try and bring this together because it's kind of the stand mixer. Yeah, this is already like it's not wet, but it's a little more wet than I'd like.
Okay.
But I want the stand mixer. This is the benefit of doing it by hand too. Is you're not beholden to the stand mixer hook attachment, being able to catch it. There we go.
So if we're filling this by hand, we're at this point where it feels a little wet. Is there anything we can do? We just kind of have to keep going with it.
You kind of have to keep going with it. I mean, you're going to flour the surface, which will also add a little bit of flour. But this is fine. It's not like wet. It's
Right.
just like a little, almost damp.
Right. Okay. But even that almost feels like a little too much. Even that almost dampness feels like it's not where it needs to be.
It's not ideal, but it's not unfixable.
Okay.
So, okay. So that's kind of the sound you want your stand mixer to make, is where it's not happy to be kneading the dough.
And it's funny because I tell people all the time when I'm working with a standing mixer that when you hear that droning sound, that's when you want to crank up the speed, but it's not that way for this.
Well, so this is just to kind of get the dough ball together. There's going to be added kneading when we use the roller.
Right.
Because you roll over the sheets a couple times. There we go. That's the noise we want here. That means that the dough is kind of like
It's coming together.
coming together.
All right. So speaking of rollers, what special tools are we using today?
Sure. So we're using two rollers. The KitchenAid stand mixer attachment. We're going to use the roller, and then we're going to use the cutter, the Parpadel cutter. I also have the Capellini cutter, but it doesn't. My personal one doesn't seem to cut like it cuts it into like two strands at once. I don't know if that's like a general issue or like an issue just with mine, but yeah. So I'm really just all about the Parpadel. You can do this by hand. It is a lot more work.
Of course.
Maybe we can even like cut off a small piece to kind of show what it's like to roll it.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. We can absolutely do that.
Yeah. Usually you cut it into 5 or 6 pieces and then roll all of those sheets out, and then we can roll an extra one out, and then we can roll it out, and then when we run the other ones through the cutter, we can show how to kind of like you fold it up and then you kind of.
And I have a pizza cutter too to kind of make the.
That's perfect.
Perfect.
The other thing you can use is what's called a bicicletta, which is like Italian for bicycle, which is a kind of a bunch of small pizza cutters on like an accordion.
Okay.
That you kind of roll across the sheet of pasta, and you can kind of decide how like wide or narrow.
Okay, that's
you
interesting.
want it to be. That's if you want to like again be like a cool DIY pasta guy.
And if you have a larger work surface than we have
If you have
here.
a large work surface, although
one day.
Yeah, but that's a cool. I mean, there's a ton of pasta you can make by hand. If you get like the gnocchi roller, you can.
You can also make it with a fork if you're particularly talented.
Yeah, I'm not.
I tried to make it and it wasn't particularly good.
Yeah. I just like my like relatively thick cut Parpadel with like a nice sauce. Okay, so we got the dough.
All right, let's take a look at it. What do we got?
So it's still very stiff.
Okay.
It's still very stiff, and you want it but you want the surface to be kind of smooth. Like,
Okay.
you know, under here, obviously, we just incorporate a little flour, but it's still a little grainy. But what you really want is kind of a smooth surface. Now, the recipe I usually use calls for you to let it sit for a little bit to get the gluten relaxed. I've done that, and then I've not done that. Maybe we should do that.
Well, let's do it.
Yeah.
What do we need?
Just some plastic wrap.
Perfect. Let's do that.
Just to cover it, and then that kind of will let the gluten relax a little bit, and then we'll roll it out.
And is this like we're covering it in a ball and throwing it in the fridge? How is
No,
this?
I mean, since we're just gonna make it, it'll just
Perfect. All right. So, what is our next move?
I think our next move might be, we can, I guess, start the sauce.
All right, let's do it. So, not only is this a special episode because I have a guest, we're making pasta, but not only that, I have a fly cam. So, we are going to be showing you what we're actually doing over the stovetop as we're doing it. Pray for us, Mother Italia. So that it's all works.
We might need that one.
Yeah, we're using this one. Yeah. All right. So give us 2 seconds. We're going to cut away to our fly cam here, and we will see you on the stovetop. 1 second. All right, and we are back on the fly cam. You can see that we are at the stovetop here. Our knobs are underneath. Yeah. Yeah, all the way to high, and then.
Got it. I actually downgraded, though it's more ecologically friendly, to an induction burner. So I've actually forgotten how to use gas. All right, so this is going to be a real simple tomato sauce. Just like canned tomatoes, garlic, basil. It's tomato season right now, so this would be great for like literally the other 11 months of the year. I mean, it's still good now, but if you have access to fresh tomatoes, just Google fresh tomato sauce, and that's that'll really kick it up a notch. But so
all right, so you just set the stove. So what did you set it to?
I set it to like a medium low.
Okay.
And then you put in some olive oil.
So how much olive oil do we have there?
I think it's like
3 tablespoons.
Yeah, so like a decent amount to give it that kind of richness. And we're not cooking it over very high, so I mean you can use like a nice extra virgin. There's obviously you don't want to cook olive oil over, like if you're cooking it over super high heat, you don't want to use like a really nice extra virgin olive oil. But because this is kind of low, you can. It won't cook out kind of the fruitiness or the bitterness depending on the kind of olive oil you use.
And olive oil is actually really sensitive to being burned. So you really need to, you can't have it on really high heat. You can't fry with it.
Right. Extra virgin you can. If you have like just like regular olive oil, it's usually on like the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually a decent frying olive oil. That's how they do Roman fried artichokes, which is associated with the Jewish community in Rome.
Oh, interesting.
They will batter and deep fry artichokes in like non-extra virgin olive oil, and it's kind of like a Roman delicacy.
Interesting. All right. So we are adding our 3 cloves of garlic to our. You can hear that lovely sizzle. Our nice warm sauce here. I'll take that from you.
Just get all of it.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you.
So
how long are we cooking the garlic here?
The
What
garlic
do we
is
want
only-
it to do?
We're only cooking it for about like 2 or 3 minutes. We're not trying to get any color.
Okay.
We're not trying to like get super brown flavors. What we're trying to get is just kind of a little bit of aromatic. So let's let that go for a little bit.
Just like a minute or two.
Yeah, a couple, like 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay. And we're actually making the entire sauce in this pot right here. Everything's
Yeah.
going to happen
Exactly.
right here.
It's very one pot. It's very easy. It's not a long simmered sauce. Another sauce I like to make is this is Marcella Hazan's brown butter sauce, which is like or butter and onion sauce, which is like a whole stick of butter and an onion.
Sounds like a Paula Deen sauce.
It's really rich, but it's gorgeous. We can send it. I'll send it to you. You put it in the show notes.
Yeah, sounds good.
The other one I like is if you have an Instant Pot or a pressure cooker, there's like a Serious Eats recipe for a pressure cooker sauce. And I like that sauce because the pressure and heat of the pressure cooker allows it actually allows for like the browning of tomatoes. So you get that kind of like umami taste. I mean, that's like very Serious Eatsy.
You can start to smell that. You can really smell that garlic now.
Yeah.
It's a really nice feeling in the kitchen.
Yeah.
It's like the focaccia episode where I told people you could smell it. You know when this is done because you can really just the whole house just smells wonderful of garlic. There you go, perfect.
Yeah. So this is like it's starting to actually get even a little bit of color. So at this point, we just kind of add our tomatoes.
All right.
With the juices,
So we have 14.5 ounces of our diced tomatoes. Store brand is fine.
Well, store brand is fine, but I'm actually a fan of using San Marzano.
Okay.
Now, you should look up to make sure that the tomatoes you're using are actually San Marzano because both San Marzano and extra virgin olive oil are one of the most fraud, one of the biggest victims of fraud.
That and Parmesan, right?
Yeah, that and Parmesan. So
just Italian things in general.
Yeah, well, yeah. Everyone wants to be Italian. Some people fake it. I mean, I'm not Italian. So just it's garlic, it's tomatoes, olive oil. Don't skimp on the olive oil because actually the richness is important into making this. So now. So
just before we move away from it, that is just a regular crushed tomatoes, 28 ounces, just to give people a sense of what we're working with here. Perfect.
And then, so I'll just turn it up a little bit to let it get to a simmer, and then turn it down and let it simmer for 15, 20 minutes.
So we just want little bubbles on the surface, and as soon as we're there,
just turn it down. I mean, you just kind of want to cook the raw tomato taste out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Is really kind of what you want. It's not like this isn't a long simmered sauce. But if you're getting nice tomatoes and nice olive oil and nice garlic, it really lets the kind of natural flavors sing, which is what I'm kind of a fan of with Italian food. Is it's really about letting kind of the ingredients speak for themselves, and so higher quality ingredients are really important, which is what's nice generally about Italian food, and that's kind of
cooking in general, right?
Yeah.
You're gonna have better ingredients. You're always gonna have a better quality product.
And I would say, yeah, and that's sort of my personal ethos. It's less about being really techniquey and really kind of French about it. It's more just kind of being this is what's good. Let's pull it together and
no offense to any of our French viewers.
No.
Yeah.
No, it's just a different style.
Of course.
So it's not you're not making elaborate. This is starting to bubble a little bit.
All right. And for a simmer, what are we looking for? Do we want bubble in the middle, bubble on the outside?
Just a little bubbles on the outside.
All right.
So you can kind of start seeing it.
Get caught up here on the fly cam. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you can definitely see some of them around.
Yeah. And you're not gonna burn anything because it's really liquidy. So.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, we're gonna let it simmer uncovered to cook off a little bit of the or partially covered to let it cook off a little bit of the water.
So how long does it sit partially covered? Is there times for 15, these or?
No, I mean it's kind of by feel.
Okay.
All right, so yeah, no, so it's got a nice little simmer. Put it to low, medium low, and like partially cover it a little bit, but really kind of, because we don't want it to like really cook down.
Right.
But
we want to preserve some of the moisture, but we also want some of the moisture to go.
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, you're putting tomatoes in with the juices, but you don't want like a watery sauce. And
Right.
also, what you're going to do is you're going to add a little bit of the pasta cooking liquid, which will also add a little bit of, liquid. Though that's like starchy and helps it stick, but like you want the tomatoes to kind of be the star of the sauce. You don't want it to be kind of you don't want it to be like too watery, because like then it won't. And it'll kind of like fall at the bottom of the bowl, it won't stick, So,
all right, so we're waiting on our sauce, we're waiting on our pasta.
Yeah.
We want to talk some socialism?
Sure, yeah.
Let's do it. All right,
Sure.
so we're going to switch back from the fly cam real quick, and we will bring you back to our regular camera here. Excuse my feet. Apologies there. It's not that kind of show. All right.
All right.
And we are back. So we have a very interesting topic today. In fact, I'm going to bring up a whiteboard just to see the crazy interesting topic we have. It's going to be one topic. Oh my God, it's a giant topic.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to talk about anarchism and libertarian socialism. And so now that you've seen the whiteboard, there's really no reason just to keep it up there.
Yeah.
You definitely want to see us chatting about it instead. So we're going to bring back our camera here. And as always, if you have any questions about what we're doing, feel free to leave a comment in the comment box, either on Facebook or YouTube. Also, we are streaming live, so you can chat with us. If you have any questions, the chat is open. We're more than happy to answer questions as they come up. So, Adam, tell me a little bit about libertarian socialism, what it is.
Okay. Well, where to start? So I guess to start with the kind of in the European tradition.
Okay. So let's step back a little bit from a European tradition of what?
The European tradition of anarchism. So
okay.
This is kind of I haven't prepared everything, so I'm kind of doing this off the top. But I want to specify that anarchic practices have kind of been used in indigenous societies, in East Asian societies, but what we normally think of as kind of the quote unquote classical anarchist tradition came out of Europe in the 19th century, and was kind of this critique of capitalism and the state as a critique of hierarchy.
Mm-hmm. So just to pause here for just for a quick second. So for people who've only heard anarchy on the news and by local pundits or whatever, it's anarchism isn't just going around spray painting the letter A on things and burning shit to the ground, right? There's more to it than that.
There's much more to it than that. So Marxism and anarchism were the two kind of dominant ideological currents of the workers' movement in the 19th century.
Okay.
And for a long time, anarchism was actually the dominant movement.
Mm-hmm.
However, those two kind of ideologies are compatible. You can have a synthesis of them, but there's always kind of been a tension between them. That was kind of the split in the First International over a number of things.
And so what is the First International?
The First International was the First International Working Men's Association. It was Marx was part of it, and it was like anarchists and Marxists kind of trying to create a larger workers' movement to challenge the power of the capitalist class. And it's split among a bunch of things. A lot of the Marxists wanted to work through kind of parliamentary systems, which didn't work in some European countries. But also, like, anarchists, weren't necessarily the woke side either. A lot of them wanted to limit membership to men and be more about kind of skilled skilled laborers rather than kind of the industrial working class. So
back to anarchism.
Yeah. Anarchism doesn't necessarily the good guys in the historical split, but a lot of modern anarchists don't treat like the 19th century anarchists like Bakunin as kind of like saints, which is kind of different. So Marxists will often critique anarchists by trying to critique Bakunin, who was also anti-Semitic, but anarchists don't treat historic or like the progenitors of classical anarchism, the way Marxists kind of treat Marx.
Fair enough. I think that's a great description of
Yeah.
Not everyone would be familiar with Bakunin, and I'm
Right,
definitely behind on
Bakunin.
my anarchist readings.
Right. No,
I must say.
And Kropotkin. I'm more of a Kropotkin fan. He was kind of a Russian anarchist, and he wrote kind of The Conquest of Bread, which is kind of what an anarchist revolution would look like. Mutual aid, a factor in evolution, which is some like not great science, but an idea about how kind of
Sounds like there's some teaching people how to make bread in there.
yeah. Well,
yeah. What a place to have a talk like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a big part of it was that the Conquest of Bread was reacting to kind of the Paris Commune.
Right.
Which kind of failed to seize power in large part because it couldn't kind of like seize the means of production more broadly. And so the idea is like, if kind of the working class seizes power, it will have to like learn to like feed itself. It will, like, it can't be starved by kind of.
And just a quick definitional: what is the means of production? What does that mean?
It's the way that it's fields, farms, and factories. Like it's kind of like how we make stuff.
Perfect.
But I'm kind of getting off the deep end.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what anarchism is today. So there was a split, right?
There was a split in the First International. But for a long time, kind of anarchism and Marxism were competing currents within the workers' movement. A lot of the United States workers' movement is actually, especially the labor movement, was driven by the Industrial Workers of the World, which is kind of an anarchist, libertarian, socialist, inflected organization.
And it's still around, and you can still be a member.
Yeah, you can still be a member.
If you look it up online, you can be a card-carrying member of the IWW. May 1st, you can celebrate with them. So they're still around. This isn't ancient history.
Yeah, there's a Philly chapter. They're lovely comrades. So the principle is that you're critiquing capital and you're critiquing capitalism not only because capitalism exploits workers, but because it's an unjustified hierarchy.
Right.
And anarchism is really a critique of hierarchical structures of domination in general, which is why the state is kind of a central idea and point of critique within anarchism. A lot of Marxists, Leninist inspired Marxists, are really about kind of like seizing the state and then using the machinery of the state to defeat the capitalist class. This is what Lenin's like state and early.
Yeah, and I haven't gone into vanguard theory. So let's not.
But it's not even vanguardism, because social democracy is also a form of like seizing state power.
Yes, absolutely.
To institute socialism.
And just so you know, social democracy is the idea that you can keep some level of the hierarchy between the capitalists and the workers intact, but if you are able to seize power in government, so what's going on in some of the Nordic countries is the idea that you can use the levers of government to provide enough goods, and I mean that in the literal and the figurative sense, to workers and individuals, that you can actually begin to move forward with a general moving left in a way that you wouldn't be able to, in theory, without it.
Right. I mean, and this is the idea behind democratic socialism too, is that if you start to seize enough parts of society, you can kind of push forward a socialist line without being outflanked by capital, by the power of capital, which will then undermine the project.
Right.
But anarchists critique that because as soon as you start using the state, you create a layer above the workers.
Right.
And then there's an inherent tension behind kind of like the bureaucratic mechanisms of government and kind of the actual self-activity of the workers.
Right.
Most famously, there's a lot of examples of this where kind of worker militancy and organizing is undercut as soon as kind of a quote unquote left or Marxist party controlled the state. This is what happened in kind of Greece, where Podemos, a coalition of left organizations, took over. Not Podemos. Is that Podemos? Yeah, I think that's Greece. Kind of took over the machinery of government, but then became the main institutors of like European Union austerity, and then came into clash with kind of anarchists there. But the more famous one, and ones that you'll kind of see anarchists almost joke about sometimes, was the Kronstadt Rebellion. So Kronstadt was kind of the anarchists of the Russian Revolution. It was a military base on the outside of St. Petersburg, a naval base in the
I was
outside.
gonna say, I remember fondly that this. Well, I wasn't there. I don't remember fondly, but I remember reading about this taking place on a submarine.
Yeah. And so I don't claim to be an expert on Kronstadt, but the broad strokes of that is that, as the Bolsheviks started to seize power, they started to remove decision-making power from the workers' councils or the Soviets, and started to kind of bureaucratize and remove decision-making power from kind of the workers' direct democracy themselves. And the sailors of Kronstadt, who were central in kind of making the Russian Revolution happen, didn't like that, had a rebellion. Famously, Trotsky and the other kind of Red Army members went in and slaughtered them, and completely crushed the rebellion, under the guise of maintaining the power of the workers' state. And then a lot of anarchists kind of consider that when the Russian Revolution kind of ended.
Right.
There's a joke that every political tendency has a kind of has a different opinion of when the Russian Revolution ended. So like Maoists consider the Sino-Soviet split is like when the USSR stopped being communist. Trotskyists think that when Stalin seized power is when the USSR stopped being socialist. Anarchists.
Although they have a bit of a dog in that fight.
Right. No, but I'm saying everyone there's a joke. It was on Twitter somewhere, and I tried to find it and couldn't. But it's what your political ideology depends on when you thought the Soviet Union stopped being socialist.
So moving to the present day,
Yes.
What does anarchism look like right now? You're
Sure.
an anarchist in real life.
Yes. So I'm an
you're here
anarchist.
with us today.
Yes.
What does anarchy look like to you? What's it look like
Sure.
in the flesh?
Anarchism kind of has taken this critique of hierarchy that originally started around capitalism and the state, and has kind of bad word, but has kind of extended that critique to a variety of areas. So anarcho-feminism critiques patriarchy as a system of domination, indigenous, anti-colonial anarchisms kind of critique, those systems as unjustified hierarchy. Eco-anarchism extends that to kind of domination of nature. Vegan anarchism kind of critiques the domination of animals by humans. So it's kind of, anarchism is not just a political movement, but it's also kind of a mode of critique. And so that's where you get kind of a little bit more of the, let's call it more out there versions of anarchism, anti-civ, and anarchism, like the idea that civilization
Right.
Perpetuates structures of domination. That's where the kind of return to monkey means come from, like anarcho-primitivism, insurrectionary anarchism, the idea that organization, you just have to kind of attack because any sort of organization will not manage to defeat structures of capitalist domination.
So there's lots of different
There's
types.
lots of different types, and so so to zero in on kind of what I consider my ideology, the ideology of kind of organizers that I know, is around what's called social anarchism. And so the idea is that social anarchism is a critique of hierarchy blended with this idea that we have to create kind of a free society with each other. And so organizing around principles of autonomy, direct ownership of the means of production. So the idea is anarcho-syndicalism, which is kind of the dominant ideology of the IWW, which is the idea that instead of bosses, what if every factory, what if every workplace was just directly controlled by the workers? And I find that to be an appealing idea because when you're kind of explaining socialism to people via a Marxist lens, you have to go through this kind of side door of talking about class struggle and the workers,
the dialectical,
and the state also comes into play because people's understanding of socialism is very much in relation to kind of state socialism in the 20th century. The way I like to explain socialism is what if you and all your coworkers just didn't have a boss? What if you just all, together, you're all hanging out at you all work at Chipotle.
Right.
What if you didn't have a boss? Like, what if you all just like collectively were like, we run the Chipotle, and then any profits we kind of like share with each other or the community, and like,
or we invest in the business.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of like a market socialism. Like co-ops aren't like the revolution, but it's a way of kind of like starting your way down the path of thinking like, okay, like what is wrong with capitalism? The idea is what's wrong with capitalism is that there's this ownership class and that we all kind of labor and that they take kind of the benefits of our labor.
Oh, it's interesting, actually. There was recently a Burger King, I forget where it was, but it was such a great example where to give appreciation to the workers, the boss actually gave them the entirety of the profits that they made for the day.
Right.
You want to guess how much they made each?
They made like $72 an hour or something.
$78 an hour. So imagine you're working at a Burger King and you're getting, what, 1,000 people in a day or whatever, and you take home $78 an hour because all the profits of the institution are going back to you instead of being fed off to a boss class. I mean,
yeah,
you know, they tell socialism is not sustainable, but I got to tell you, that sounds really sustainable to me.
Yeah, I mean, and the idea is that, you know, the worker deserves everything that they create. And, you know, there's been examples too of, in Greece, you know, there's been like factories that they were like, okay, we're offshoring this factory, we're shutting this factory down, and the workers refused and basically just like literally seized the factory, and we're just like, no, we run this factory now. And there's ways of kind of instituting that idea via the state. So, you know, this was part of actually Jeremy Corbyn's plan in England, which is that if a business shuts down, the first right of refusal for that business is for the workers. So
there's similar legislation about tenants and buildings going around in some of the leftist circles in the United States too. So the idea generally is that if something is going to happen to you without your consent, you have the ability to raise money or to find some other way of creating a situation where you can be in charge of what happens, as opposed to letting the people who are above you, as it were, make these decisions for you and then just leave you with the consequences. And this is some of the negative externality stuff that we talk about in terms of economics and a little bit forward to that. I want to just pivot just a little bit because I can smell our sauce and smelling good.
Yeah, our sauce is smelling good.
Our sauce is smelling good. I want to talk a little bit where does anarchism hit socialism? I've heard this word, libertarian socialism. It may have been on the whiteboard. Where are we moving from here?
Sure. So libertarian socialism has nothing to do with kind of like classical market libertarianism, you know, right-wing libertarianism. That's actually was taken very intentionally from like the term libertarian was originally French because the term anarchism was banned, and like libertaire. And so
one of the tenets of the French Revolution.
Yeah, exactly. The idea that you know, people deserve liberty, but that idea has kind of been intentionally taken and subverted by right-wing ideologues. So there's two kind of very related terms: social anarchism, which is kind of this anarchism that fuses kind of socialist ideas. The kind of progenitor of that idea is kind of Peter Kropotkin, and then libertarian socialism, which is kind of a form of socialism that not only values kind of like worker control over the means of production, but also blends it with this kind of like socialism is kind of an ideology about how things kind of are. Like capitalism is bad because it exploits workers and removes them from the means of production. That's kind of like what is. Libertarian socialism is kind of includes an ought, that people ought to be as free and have as much autonomy and control over their lives as possible. Mm-hmm. And so this is kind of how you can kind of critique state socialist projects, because as we like learned in kind of the Kronstadt example and then examples throughout socialist states in history, is that the state will often remove, because the state is a system of domination, and systems of domination exist to kind of perpetuate themselves. The state will remove power from kind of organic working class kind of like systems of control, mm-hmm. And bureaucratize and create kind of this unjustified hierarchy that completely undermines kind of the whole point of socialism.
Right.
You know,
Right.
Obviously.
Yeah, I think some socialists might disagree with you.
Yeah, no, that's
including the one who's presently speaking.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's not a debate, right? So this is just a learning session.
Right.
So
so
if we were going to just to kind of wrap this thought up, if we were looking at what a libertarian socialist model would look like in
Sure.
kind of its basic form, like give me like a 5-tenant libertarian socialism. What are we working with here?
Sure. So I guess the easiest way to think about like what does a libertarian socialist do is to talk about Libertarian Socialist Caucus of the Democratic Socialists of America. And we're not claiming to speak entirely for all libertarian socialists and anarchists. This is just
of course. The left is perfect at eating
right.
their own without
Right. But the project that the broader Libertarian Socialist Caucus of the Democratic Socialists of America is engaged in is kind of infusing libertarian socialist ideas with the broader socialist left, as represented, not entirely, but in relation to the Democratic Socialists of America, which is like a large left organization, and is a big tent, or for now remains like a big tent socialist organization. So there's no line you have to follow. So
here.
yeah, I know. So the idea is encouraging libertarian ideas of freedom, democracy, and equality throughout the organization. And a lot of the ways that that manifests itself is by helping organize around projects that build independent working class power, not via the state, but via kind of worker control themselves, which includes kind of like new shop unions, rather than working with existing labor unions necessarily, tenant unionization, so that people kind of like organize themselves to fight their landlord. Mutual aid, which is a big kind of like tenet of libertarian socialism, is the idea that our systems of relating to each other should be mutual, non-hierarchical, and outside of the existence of capitalism. So kind of building mutual aid networks to help people feed their neighbors during necessarily the COVID crisis. I'm on the national working group of the mutual aid. I'm on the committee, the steering committee of the National Mutual Aid Working Group. So I've been helping kind of chapters connect and create kind of mutual aid networks in their chapters, which are then not only great on their own, but also help kind of dovetail into other organizing projects. So like mutual aid networks can bolster tenant organizing or bolster worker organizing. It can also bolster the organization itself, which is might not be the most libertarian, socialist, or anarchist in and of itself, but it's how kind of we get like the seat at the table. It's like if a DSA chapter grows because it's doing great mutual aid work, then no one's going to try and shut it down, because DSA is filled with kind of authoritarian socialists or people who have not kind of critiqued their own kind of authoritarian leanings and would like to be the boss of things. And so fighting against kind of this boss mentality within the organization and increasing kind of transparency, democracy. In 2019, it had a proposal that was defeated because the organization isn't necessarily a libertarian socialist organization, to kind of get rid of national leadership and this kind of 2-year convention that is currently going on and is very dramatic, with kind of an assembly of locals, where it's like just more direct democracy from kind of the membership to the national leadership, because national leadership,
the original Soviet model, if I may.
Honestly, yeah. A lot of modern libertarian socialists are very enamored by kind of this confederalist system of confederated councils of workers and tenants and all of that. And so they directly elect recallable delegates to a council, and then that council can then elect directly recallable delegates to another council. And as you confederate these councils, you kind of make decisions collectively across broad.
You create non-state structure.
Yes, it's a non-state governance structure, and this is kind of where I would put myself a little bit more on the libertarian socialist side of things, because this, to some anarchists, looks like a state, and it's currently being used in a modified form in the Kurdish kind of non-state state of Rojava. Kurdistan, Rojava. A lot of this was articulated in a modern sense by a writer named Murray Bookchin. So if you hear Google Murray Bookchin, that's like a big part of what he talks about, and then kind of used by not used, but like applied to kind of the Kurdish situation by Abdul Öcalan, who is currently sitting in a Turkish island prison.
The best prisons, really.
Yeah, well, they can't. He's like the only person on this Turkish island prison because Turkey wants to join the EU, and so has abolished the death penalty. So they put political dissidents on island prisons. But yeah, if you hear free Oppo, that's kind of like what that's about. And he's also very it's incorporated a lot of socialist feminist and anarcho-feminist ideas into it. So it's like the women's revolution in Rojava as well. Because a lot of these workers' councils, the way that they operationalize kind of gender parity is they create special councils and special representative bodies for women specifically. And there's actually like the fighters. There's two kind of fighters. There's the YPG and the YPJ, and one of them is kind of the specific women's unit. All of that. I'm not an expert.
Yeah.
I guess I'm an expert more than anyone, but like more than your average person. But I don't claim to be an expert.
Yeah, of course. And actually, I think this is a good place to kind of bring us back to food, especially if you're talking about mutual aid, feeding each other. And one of the ways you can feed each other is to make food together. And so that's what we're doing here. So thank you so much for the explanation.
My pleasure.
It was a great chat. So I see you're dividing our dough here. What do you got going
so
on?
We're gonna start.
We don't need this again?
Yeah, we don't need it. So we're gonna start cutting this dough to start rolling it out. So normally I cut it into 6 pieces. Actually, I think I'm gonna do that this time.
All right.
They're not always it's nice. This is nice and firm. Good. It's not always the most even, but we're gonna try it out.
All right. While you do that, I'm going to give our sauce a little bit of a taste and some salt and pepper.
Salt, pepper, and sugar.
Salt, pepper. Yeah. So that's done off heat. So I'm just going to taste it for doneness, and then we will start moving some of this off.
Yeah.
And I'll be useful for once this all episode.
No. You put things together. So yeah. I mean, I'll add. There's a wonderful essay by in Assembly magazine, which was a project of the Libertarian Socialist Caucus, by one of our comrades, John Cologne, who turned me onto libertarian socialism, about what is libertarian socialism. And he does a much better job of articulating these ideas than I do, which I'm doing in sort of a roundabout way. And so we're just kind of rolling this dough thin enough. You can use a roller, you can just use your hands. And we're setting it on the widest setting.
It also tastes really good. We're really getting there on the sauce.
So
just real quick. So just so you know, from back here, we just adding a little bit of salt and a little bit of pepper to our sauce just for taste. Don't add the sugar or the basil until it's completely off the heat, okay? You can burn the basil, so we don't want to do that. And you can caramelize the sugar, we don't want to do that either. So while Adam's preparing, and this is called laminating, he's folding it over and over again and running it through this. If you're doing this without a laminator like we have here, you're just going to roll out on our board here and then fold it over itself in a three-way manner such that it folds back into the correct shape, and just keep doing that until it's the right consistency. And what would that consistency be?
The consistency, it's just, I mean, it's already kind of pretty tough and pretty built up. But what you want is just basically for it to be as just kind of tacky, not tacky, very dry and firm. And then you start rolling it through. So there's a couple ways. Ways of thinking about how thin you want the dough. A lot of the ways that I've looked at recipes early on was that you want a very tender pasta. So you roll it to kind of second to last or third to last setting on your pasta roller. I actually like a little bit of a chewier noodle. little bit heftier. I think that it's a little more satisfying. Again, it's not that traditional. It's a little bit more like a hand-pulled noodle.
And in reality, there's no right answer here,
Yeah.
right? You could make it as thick or as thin as you want, just based on what you're comfortable with. So if you're doing this by hand, it really just depends how thick do you want your noodles to be, keeping in mind that they will hydrate when they are in water. So you want to make sure that you have them just a shy thinner than what you'll want them to be.
Yeah.
When you're done.
So I'm rolling this out to the fifth setting.
So do you have a sense about what size that is?
I do not. Honestly.
All right, that's all right.
I usually roll it to about the fourth or fifth setting. But we'll do fifth, just to be a little bit more delicate because the sauce is not. The sauce is not like it's. You know, if you were making like a bolognese or something that's very chunky, a thicker noodle is kind of nice. But this is also good. This is going to cut nicely.
All right, and our sauce is done. So I'm just going to cover it. I'm going to add our sugar and our. So the sauce is off the heat now. So you're going to put in your 3 tablespoons of basil and just stir, and just a pinch or about a quarter teaspoon. About a quarter teaspoon of sugar. So what is this? What do we look at?
This is a drying rack.
Why do we need the drying rack?
Because you want it to dry a little bit before. You want it to dry a little bit before cutting, so that the noodles don't stick to themselves. So here we have our sheet. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't perfectly done on these, but it'll just cut a nice little. It'll cut nicely into noodles. It doesn't have to be perfect. It'll be delicious regardless. So now the camera will have like a nice shot of the drying pasta.
You know, the greatest thing about homemade food is it doesn't have to be perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
As long as it's edible and delicious, and you've made it in a way that is, good for you. That's really all you can ask for.
And yeah, I mean the other main kind of political priority of the Libertarian Socialist Caucus, besides direct organization of organizations of workers and tenants and mutual aid, the last thing is kind of the last two things I would say. One is creating kind of intersectional socialism. So the idea that race and gender are forms of racism, and patriarchy and heteropatriarchy are forms of unjustified hierarchy. That we are kind of called to fight those, as well as capitalism, which is in contrast to more kind of class reductionist strains of socialism that kind of prioritize class over other forms of oppression. Anarchists and libertarian socialists believe that will only lead to a workers' movement that is dominated by straight white men and the concerns thereof. And then the other is a commitment to anti-fascist organization. The idea that workers' movements in the history have been crushed by right-wing paramilitary groups.
And powerful state actors.
In concert with state actors. And so organizing against, the LSC isn't like Antifa in the sense that it's like, the black bloc kids who are, punching Nazis, even though good on them. It's kind of, knowing how fascists are organizing and disrupting their ability to kind of disrupt socialist organizing, especially on the West Coast. Comrades have dealt with kind of fascist infiltration. When I was in New York, a group of white nationalists dropped a banner in a predominantly Latino area, and so we kind of helped organize a counter rally against them. In Philly, sometimes Proud Boys will show up, and so showing solidarity with the rest of the community in rejecting kind of these revanchist white wing nationalist movements is kind of important. And again, this is not something that's shared. This is not a political perspective that's shared by the entire organization, particularly in Philly, where people were discouraged from protesting the Proud Boys and the fascists, and saying that's a distraction from kind of working class concerns. but capitalism crisis turns to fascism to crush workers' movements, and so anti-fascist organizing and showing solidarity with those affected by nation fascist movements in the United States is a central tenet, a central priority of the Libertarian Socialist organization. So then in 2019, we helped organize to create a national DSA working group for anti-fascism that is helping chapters connect the resources on how to prevent far-right movements from taking root in their communities.
And by the way, this type of far-rightism doesn't have to come inherently from individuals who are organized as right-wingers. This can come from the state too.
Yes.
A great and the capitalist class on its own. A great place to start. A very brief, not a brief introduction, because Mr. Klein doesn't write short books, but
Right.
Disaster Capitalism.
No, Naomi Klein.
Naomi Klein. I'm sorry, Naomi Klein. Thank you. So Naomi Klein's Disaster Capitalism is a great, very basic intro as to what capitalism does in a crisis. So we're talking a little bit about crisis-based capitalism. So I just wanted to bring that up. And the expert, I wanted to give a first finished taste of our sauce. Perfect.
All
right.
Yeah, great. Good job.
All right.
And I was completely remiss in arguing that speaking of state actors, nice pepper.
Not too much?
No,
Oh, good.
I mean peppery, but it's good.
Oh, good.
Abolition, and so the idea that the fact that the state controls people through the policing and prisons, abolishment of all police and prisons is kind of the central tenet of libertarian socialism. Again, not a winning, but not universally held belief on the left of prisons and police abolition, because you give someone a badge and a gun, they now have power over you.
The Stanford experiment actually is a great example of this. For those of you who don't know, the Stanford experiment was a professor, and I think in an intro political science class, essentially said to the students, they broke the students up, I think it was like 30 students in a class or something, and they said to one half of the students in the room, for no reason except for my arbitrary decree as professor, you are the prison guards. And to the other 15 or so in the class, it was like, for no other reason other than my arbitrary judgment, you are the prisoners. And this was a behavioral experiment that devolved incredibly quickly. And in fact, it devolved so quickly that the experiment had to be canceled because students were, the warden students were attacking the prisoner students, either in class and out of class. It got very violent. And essentially, what it showed, although I'm not sure it was intended to show, was that as soon as you create these systems of power, regardless of how you do them, you can, especially if you give explicit power, you can create situations where individuals are, feel inclined to exercise that power by use of force. And obviously, this would be totally counter to the type of, anti-statism that we're talking about.
Right. So, lending support to the movement of for Black Lives, lending support to abolitionist movements around the country, showing solidarity with incarcerated workers, are all kind of like major priorities for libertarian socialist organizers. So, in the DSA context, it's really kind of like direct organizing, direct organizing the unorganized, abolition, mutual aid, and kind of democracy and transparency for the national organization and chapters. So that's kind of, I think a lot of the confusion with a lot of political ideologies is that it's difficult to connect the ideological principles with kind of like on the ground praxis. So,
well, what is that word? Praxis.
Praxis is like the combination of like theory and action. So, praxis is like the work. Like what is the work that you're doing? And I think it's important to foreground kind of the work because it allows people to see themselves as political actors. Our society views politics as kind of that thing up there, and you vote every 2 to 4 years for representatives that do politics for you, or it's what.
And part of that's intentional, right?
Yes.
To intentionally drag people out of the process. I mean, regardless of where on the left you are, whether you believe in anarchism or you have some other leftist belief.
Yeah.
Because certainly I know we've been very cordial. Adam and I actually do not agree entirely on our ideology, but the thing is, it's a general understanding of how these institutions that we kind of live in are used with and against us, and what our interaction with them is. And that is part of praxis too, is interacting with them in a way that is more than just this kind of artificial, you only get to involve yourself in a democratic country every 2 years. I mean, in truth, it's not very democratic.
Right.
If voting is all you do, yes, you're participating in democracy in the theoretical sense of democracy from like Greece, but society is more complicated than it was then, and
right.
And decisions are made in different ways. So it's always helpful to have a general sense of what's going on around you, how it affects you, how it impacts people, and what you can do to change that if you don't like it.
Right, and and none of the structures of our democratic system are directly democratic; they're all representative democratic. I mean, and the idea that directly elected, recallable delegates. What would Congress look like if there were, if people were recalled?
Direct democracy. Would you have voted for Socrates?
Oh God, I'm not. Listen, I'm bad at like 19th century anarchism. I'm even worse at like classical.
No, people think, oh well, you can't have this direct democracy because not everyone has time to get into the public square and vote on everything. But like in truth, that's not what we've discussed, right? We've discussed a creation of purely democratic structures, but not ones that are so far removed from the individuals that they represent, so that we feel like we don't have any power. And of course, this is multiplied by money in politics and other effects that, especially in the American context, where the levers of capital have taken over the levers of power, and you see very little, what's the word I'm looking for? Divergence between the levers of power and the levers of capital. So,
right. I mean, and the other aspect to this too is that we're talking about representatives in kind of a state-like structure, which is a big thing that anarchists critique. If instead of looking at representatives for your city spokes council or municipal kind of body, it's instead you're like representatives of your workplace or your building or your community directly. It's not like the idea is that these representative structures are rooted in people's organic social relations rather than kind of this inorganic state structure. So, you and your coworkers at Burger King and Chipotle are part of the Burger King council. And
right.
Council
Burger King local whatever number. Yeah.
Exactly. And this is kind of, I think, the easiest way of thinking about a socialist society, and there's critiques of this, of course, is thinking about an anarcho-syndicalist society. It's like, what if all of society, what if people's jobs, and we're going to broadly define jobs to include kind of like informal and care work, and people exercise kind of autonomy and decision making through direct how they
direct ownership,
and direct representation through the social structures that they kind of interact with on a daily basis. And anarcho-syndicalism was the dominant ideology of the Spanish anarchists in the Civil War, which took over kind of the Catalonian state and were eventually crushed by the fascists, in large part because the communists, backed by Stalin, instead of allying with the anarchists, instead tried to fight them and then undermine them and push a Stalinist line, and that kind of divided the left, and the fascists took power. So
we're really doing it. We're gonna get out.
Let's get a roller. Yeah.
All right, let's do it. Would you like our jade roller?
Sure. Actually, I like.
You like the French roller? All right.
So
if you want it to match.
No. Yeah, so we're doing it. It's been a while.
So if you are doing it this way, you're just rolling it back and forth. Do you need to follow the work surface? Talk to me a little bit about.
So I mean, it's not really that sticky. So it doesn't need to be that floured. I mean, it's going to be kind of a small. It's not going to be the biggest thing. I mean, sorry.
No, you're
We
good.
cut it up so that we cut it up for the roller, which obviously you see how thin. You see how thin it gets there. This is going to be a lot less thin. So we're just going to do our best to kind of roll it out into a sheet. If I were doing this entirely by hand, I wouldn't cut it into 6 pieces. I'd cut it into like 3 or 4, and get these like nice little sheets.
But essentially, it's the same process, right?
Yeah.
You're getting it out to a thinness that you will feel comfortable with, and then from there, we can then cut it into
noodles.
And actually, speaking of which, I'm going to get out our pizza cutter so we can do that when it's ready. Just have that on standby over here.
Yeah, I mean, this is the traditional way of doing it.
Make your Nona proud.
Make my Nonna proud.
That's all right. Nona's Bubbies. I mean, you know,
Bubby.
more or less the same thing.
This is not how Bubby does it either.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
But yeah, so I don't know. Is there any questions that you have? It's kind of been a circumlocutus kind of conversation. I guess.
No, it's really helpful because I mean, first of all, I know my libertarian socialist chops are definitely not what they should be,
right.
And this conversation has been very enlightening and helpful. But also, I feel like for the audience too, just to kind of talk through these things because. The thing is, a lot of theory feels as if it's totally unreachable, and part of that is because many of these ideologies are against the will of the state, and the state doesn't want us really learning them in school and what have you. If you are learning about these things, it's often at a university level,
right?
And at a university level, it's being taught as theory because that's what happens at a university, right? You learn it from an objective perspective. You learn about anarchism in your political science class, not as an ideology that you can actively participate in, but as an ideology that exists in the world somewhere, right? Your professors aren't saying, hey, by the way, local anarchist club, you learn about anarchism today, and the local anarchist club meets in room 302 next week, right?
Well,
that often isn't happening.
I mean, yeah, and the other thing is that, anarchism, there's back and forth critiques of anarchism. Murray Bookchin wrote an article. Some of my comrades like it, some of them don't. Like a critique of lifestyle anarchism versus kind of social anarchism. The idea that a lot of people are drawn to the ideology because the structures of capitalism in the state and society, patriarchy, all of that, white supremacy, fail. So they bring that anarchist critique to kind of their community subculture a little bit. And that's how you kind of get the stereotype of the crust punk, black clad anarchist. That's almost a little depoliticized,
cartoony.
It's not even cartoon. It's a little cartoony, but it's also like it's a lifestyle. It's not a political movement. And I don't want to critique those people because a lot of them are involved in kind of like mutual aid. A lot of them were involved in setting up the Camp James Tillett Dean that was like kind of a protest of the Philadelphia Housing Authority. It was a homeless encampment that was also a protest. It ended up getting a bunch of houses for residents of the encampment and kind of showed.
It was by the 676, right? Getting the Vine Street Expressway.
Yeah. It was, and it was successful, and the idea that you can organize people who are not traditional workers were good, and a lot of people showed solidarity, and a lot of anarchist groups were there. The Philly chapter of the Libertarian Socialist Caucus came and helped organize donations and helped feed people. So I'm not trying to say that it's entirely depoliticized, and it's not entirely not entirely just kind of like self-indulgent lifestyle, but there's an extent to which you want to balance the kind of critiques of hierarchy and the desire for individual freedom with also the desire to change, kind of to like build the kind of socialist society that you want. So
Right. The intersection of the two can be difficult.
Right. So, I mean, the way we describe the Libertarian Socialist Caucus is that we're kind of the nerd table of the anarchist lunchroom, in that we're not, you know, the hardcore. We're not hardcore. We're here with our, you know, our theory and the principles that we organize around. But we would never claim to be like the voice of anarchism, especially in Philly,
right.
Which is, you know, established, and we want to respect kind of the work they've done. But at the same time, media portrayals, and this is not this is not the fault of the people who are living this way, but rather the fault of the capitalist society that we live in, would like to foreground that version of anarchism because it's less threatening. It's not less threatening, but it for a long time it was kind of the dominant strain of anarchism, and now it's hard to say.
And it drives regular people away. I mean,
right.
So.
And you know,
regular is the wrong word.
Yeah, regular
is the wrong word.
Regular is a loaded term.
Yeah, no, I mean it has the ability to drive away people who are not already involved.
Right.
I mean, like,
right, and it's not always rooted in kind of like it's not always rooted in like organic kind of like social movements. It becomes a subculture and thus divorced from kind of like a lot of workers. And again, we don't want to like, you know, fetishize the worker as the main movement, but
so
I think you all get it.
Yeah, so we have this now. So does this need to dry, or is this this is where you want it?
I mean,
it looks good.
Yeah,
it looks good for hand rolled. I couldn't have done it better.
Actually, we don't even need.
We don't even need a
knife.
I have a knife. I just thought it would be a more fun knife.
Okay, we can do that.
I have a knife.
I mean, the way I learned how to make
Sir?
pasta by hand is you kind of roll this out, make sure it's dry, and then just kind of fold it over itself.
So why are we folding it? What's the purpose?
Because when we get the knife,
so these are our noodles.
These are our noodles.
All right.
I hope they were dry enough. Don't get sticky. I think we're good. And you know, again,
so it's an Israeli shaped noodle.
Yeah.
On that one.
Yeah, no, it's not the prettiest, but.
No, but so to get a sense that you can do it by hand. I mean, these are edible noodles, right? That you can make them thinner and smaller. You have a lot of control here about what you do with them. So this is what we're going for with these. We're going to use the roller for the rest of them just to kind of speed up this process. But you can get a sense that this is not totally inaccessible to you if you're doing this without tools.
Yeah, and if you don't have a stand mixer but want a roller, they make hand crank rollers that I've heard are very good.
And they look like you're in an old tiny candy shop, right? You got the hanger, yeah.
Let's grab this Semolina.
All right.
Just to keep it from sticking.
Of course.
I'm getting clean.
Well, luckily we're making food.
I know. You want to actually start?
I'll start boiling the water.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that'll take a little bit.
Yeah.
So.
You want the water salted?
Yeah.
Right.
And like pretty salted too.
Yep.
And so when the pasta is cut, you dust it with semolina flour. The other type of flour I really like, shout out to Conrad, for this tip, is rice flour, which kind of really keeps things from sticking, and you know, washes off when you wash the pasta. Replacing this as
excellent handoff there.
Yeah. So this is the fettuccine cutter, not fettuccine. Pappardelle, it's just a thick noodle. And the fact that the pasta is kind of dry will keep it from sticking when you cut these. Also, kind of cut it over the.
Yeah, here I can move this just a little bit. Yeah. That should hold on its own. Are we done with the knife?
We're done with the knife.
All right.
Sorry.
No, you're good. Yeah, just move it a little bit over. Yes. Have the stand mixer fall off the table. Yeah, do that.
Do that. All right. So
does this go through multiple times?
Nope.
It's only go through once.
Yep.
All right. So we have the roller here, and we're just gonna put it through and get some noodles. Now, once these are ready to get cooked, about how long does it take to cook them because they're fresh? I know in a box of pasta you can get anywhere from like 4 to 12 minutes, but what are we looking at for this guy?
3 to 5.
3 to 5?
I mean, they're easy to pull out of the water and just kind of like give a bite. These are nice. You did a good job with this.
Oh, compliments to yourself here.
Oh,
Nice part of the cooking space.
yeah. Oh, it's a nice space.
We do our best up here. What can I say? So you don't need to put these in any sort of way once they're done. You just
No, I actually like to kind of just like have them very loose.
Okay. So I've seen that nesting is a thing. Can you explain nesting, what that is,
you just
why
kind
you might
of
do
you kind of make little nests to kind of portion it out.
Nice.
The thing about it is that these aren't like when I cut them, I kind of cut them like they're different lengths, so
They're not in even serving.
they're not in even serving. Yeah. So I mean, if you really want to portion it out, you can take all of them, put them on a scale, figure out how much pasta you have, and then divide it into 3 or 4 little, which isn't like the worst thing, honestly. I've done it before.
Okay.
So, kind of just like let it.
Now, if you don't eat all of these in one go,
Yeah, they don't last a ton of time.
so can you freeze them?
Yes, you can freeze them.
Okay.
Freezing is what you want to do. But because of the fresh egg, it lasts like a day or 2.
Oh, okay.
I wouldn't.
Yeah. So how long do they freeze for, and how do you want to freeze them if that's what you're going to do?
I mean, they freeze indefinitely. In my opinion, I don't know. It doesn't stick around.
Okay. Yeah. Well, right. And that's fair.
Yeah.
These probably won't either. But for anyone who might be making,
Yeah.
a larger batch,
I don't know. 6 months.
all right,
It's frozen. Once
Yeah.
it's frozen, it's in deep freeze.
Right.
And it reheats. Like you don't have to worry about like.
And do you need to thaw it before you put it in the water? You just throw it
Yeah,
in
you can
frozen?
just throw it in frozen.
Throw it in frozen. Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
And then that's the cook time, I imagine.
yes, but an amount. Like
Yeah.
it's easy to like just pull a noodle out and just like
Right.
bite it and be like, this feels right.
Right.
Um,
And remember, when you're cooking your noodles, you want al dente, right? You want which
well, al dente is a little bit more for dry.
Oh,
Fresh,
interesting.
fresh al dente is less of a thing.
Okay. So
just-
what do you want it to? You just know when it's done because it tastes right. What does
Yeah.
tasting right mean?
You just want it to taste. You don't want it to taste. You want it to be like tender and chewy. You want it to be a little chewy.
All right.
So
This looks great.
yeah, and then just kind of like
Gather them up together.
gather them up and put like
So you're working with your hands a lot more now.
Yeah.
We're making Nona's proud somewhere.
yeah, exactly.
That's this before it goes. Did push on the end of the work surface there, I'm afraid. Yeah, let me just turn this off. I think we're done.
Yeah, we're done. So coffee, but yeah, I mean, here we've got kind of a lovely bunch of fresh pasta. We have our sauce, and we're just waiting for the
Water to go. But we are actually not going to do the water on camera. But so what we're going to end up doing is, so we've told you about how long it takes. So you want to boil some water, just enough to cover your pasta, and then a little bit more. You want the saltiness to be, I heard saltiness of the sea is about where you want it to be.
You want it to be pretty salty because the pasta is not going to absorb a ton of the water, but you want it to absorb some. Like it will absorb some just by being there, but most of that's going to go like down the drain. So you're not like
All right.
you're not overdoing it. So.
And then once you do that, you just want to serve an amount that you are willing to eat with a ladle of our sauce. Obviously, more sauce for the better.
Yeah.
And if you have cheeses, what cheeses would you recommend pairing with this dish today?
I mean, a sprinkle of Parmesan, Pecorino Romano. You want a little like buffalo mozzarella balls. It's all delicious. I mean, I mean, it's tomato sauce. The other sauces I really like are like a cream sauce. It clings nicely to kind of noodles this shape, like an Alfredo. You know, if you want to, for these guys, you know, the really thick ones that we did by hand, those are really nice with like a bolognese. Maybe not the weather for it right now, but like, you know, an Italian Sunday gravy. You know, the sauce I make right now, if you want to like add a little protein to it, you can like fry some sausages. And just kind of like throw those in. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't use this pasta necessarily for something like a cacio e pepe. It's also good. It's also good with like non-traditional sauces. You know, it's like good as a base. We were talking earlier about using like fresh ingredients. You know, you got some like
Fresh pesto might be really
fresh
nice.
pesto is really nice. Roasted root vegetables.
And it is the season for it. You get basil
There's
and
lots of
pine nuts.
basil. Yeah. You know, during the fall and winter, sometimes I'll like, you know, roast some squash and some potatoes and other like root vegetables and kind of toss it with it. The kind of chunks of roasted root vegetables are nice with a little bit of the heftier pasta. You saute some like kind of hearty greens, collards, kale, that kind of thing. And then do it with kind of like a white wine garlic. It's like becomes this kind of like almost like winter salad bowl almost.
Well, that sounds really good. You know, we might have to get you on again to make some of these delicacies you're making. You're peeling here to.
One year I did 1 year for Thanksgiving, instead of doing traditional stuffing, I made like a stuffing pasta.
Oh, interesting.
The celery and sausage and sage kind of taste. Made a sauce out of that with some white wine and chicken stock, and then toss it with the pasta.
Oh, interesting.
I still like regular stuffing, but it's like a fun
no,
little,
but it's interesting. I mean, variations, right?
Yeah.
And I think actually just to cap off this conversation, you know, this shows just how useful it is to have this skill, right? So I talk about every week how, you know, it's useful to have bread. I use it very limited. You know, I'm making toast and I'm making sandwiches with it, but there's so much you can do with bread and pasta the same way. So
you throw it on top of you know, breakfast. It makes like you fry an egg and cut up some like fry up some bacon. You know, you like get like some like slab bacon, you chop it up into little like chunks. You fry up an egg and you put it on top of pasta. You got like a little pasta breakfast.
Yeah.
Huh.
Well, I'm looking forward to your immersion cookbook.
Yeah.
Where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at RoseLuxembourg1. You can find me on Instagram at Graphic Novelty. I mean, all of that's kind of like personal. Like, it's not like I'm not like a public-facing person.
Fair enough.
But yeah, and you know, if you're
get organized.
Yeah, if you're interested in getting organized, you know, check out your local Democratic Socialists of America and see if there's kind of a Libertarian Socialist Caucus there. You can connect to the National Libertarian Socialist Caucus if you Google it. You know, there's a great kind of community across the country. Not only like, you know, DSA is the vehicle. It's not the LSC aren't the people thinking that like DSA is like the thing. It's like a useful kind of place to do organizing now. For now, but no one organization is the movement. It's just kind of convenient. It's a kind of convenient place to live. And, you know, people appreciate, because we are like organizing. We're organizing around mutual aid, anti-fascism, abolition, and making things, you know, direct democratic. So get democratized.
Yeah, get democratized, get organized. There are plenty of venues for you to organize in, regardless of what city you live in. And Adam, thanks so much for coming on the show, man. I really appreciate it.
Great.
All right, everybody. So this is the end of our episode. You know how we are cooking our pasta. You will see our finished product in a little bit once I'm able to get a picture of it. Next week, with any luck, we will have an additional guest on, but no details yet, so I don't want to spoil the surprise. For another very special topic and a very special food. So I hope you enjoyed the episode. I will see you next time. Take care, everybody.